Okay.
So thank you for those of you who are here on time. So I'm going to formally say thank you. Thank you to Alan Niku for joining us today, and thank you for all of you who are joining us. On behalf of the American Sephardi Federation Institute of Jewish Experience, we are very honored to have you come and speak about warriors and mystics of Iran. And Alan Niku is a filmmaker, writer, and scholar of Mizrahi culture from San Luis Obispo in California, and now he's based in Los Angeles in his dark apartment. And he's a native speaker of Persian, as well as 9 other languages that he has learned throughout, like we have just been speaking. He spends his time learning related Jewish languages, deciphering Judeo-Persian manuscripts, and interviewing community members about their stories. He's also a musician and an amateur chef, teaches history and Jewish heritage at various levels, and seeks to educate the world about the underrepresented cultures of the Middle East through his writing and films, and now through speaking at the IJE, which that is our goal as well. So we want to make sure we get the word out there. Thank you so much for coming and sharing it with us. All of the participants' cameras and microphones are off throughout the presentation. At the end, we will invite you to open your cameras and microphones. Keep your microphones quiet unless you need to say something. And now I'll hand the floor over to Alan. Thank you so much again.
All right. Thank you, Dora. So today I'm going to talk about some of the most interesting characters of Persian Jewish history that I've come across in my researches. When I ask people who they know about from Persian Jewish history, it's usually people will say Esther and Mordechai, and then some people will say some more modern figures like post-Islamic Revolution. And so I always wonder, being that those two groups of people have 2,500 years in between them, I wonder who is in between that? Like, were the Persian Jews just sitting around for all those years, for 2,500 years, or was stuff happening, and were there interesting characters in our history? So the answer, of course, is that there were interesting characters in our history. I'm going to share my screen here. So today we're going to talk about people from the Arab invasion to the time of the Mongols. So that's the 600s through the 1300s. There are a lot of figures from before that, from 500 BCE to 500 CE, from those 1,000 years. But that's kind of outside the scope of this. We're going to start today with the Arab invasion in the year 642 and talk about some of the people who came after that. But I'll give you some background. Let me see. There we go. So I'll give you some background. So first of all, Persia is this region right here in the middle. This is modern day Iran. Let me use Iran and Persia interchangeably. So originally it was a Zoroastrian nation. Zoroastrian is the religion that it was. And the second biggest religion was Jewish. And second most important religion culturally was Jewish. So there were a lot of Jewish people who were there. They wrote the Talmud. They had a bunch of warrior states that were like buffer states between the Persians and the Romans. We're going to see a lot of wars between this region of Persia and whoever was to their west. So in the Zoroastrian period, it was the Zoroastrian Persians fighting the Romans over here. And a little bit later, it was the Persians fighting the Byzantines who were here. And then even later, it was the Persians who were fighting the Ottomans over here. So we see a lot of this war in between these two people. But in that time, the Jews helped the Persians conquer Jerusalem. These are the Persian Jews who were living in Persia for 1,000 years at this point. They brought monotheism to Arabia down in the south, which eventually became a new religion called Islam, but then took over the whole region. And the Persian Jews founded major Persian cities, married Persian kings and princesses. So they were very much a part of Persian culture for those 1,000 years. Now, when the Muslims invaded in 642, they took over the whole region. They started converting the whole region to Islam. But very quickly, within 100 years, we start to see Persian Jewish characters popping up. Even before that, even in a lot of the Muslim invasion, a lot of the Muslim stories, there are Persian Jews involved in that narrative. But in 642 and the next 100 years, we start to see Persian Jews arising. So we're going to very quickly talk about one of them. His name is Mashallah ibn Atari. This is an Arabic name. You're going to see at first a lot of Arabic names. Mashallah ibn Atari was born in Basra, which is where the red marker is on that map, so in the very southwest of the region. Today it's in Iraq, but it was culturally part of Persia for a very long time. But his family was from Khorasan, which is where that little gray marker is that you see. So his family was from northeastern Persia. He was born in southwestern Persia, in Basra. And he was a Persian Jew who became an astrologer and an astronomer and a mathematician. And in 762, he moved to the new burgeoning city of Baghdad. And he introduced the concepts of astronomy and astrology to that city, where they then became very, very big subjects and became kind of one of the early places that these were studied in the world. So a Persian Jew was very, very significant for the kind of mathematical and astronomical history of the region. He became a pretty big deal. He even has a crater on the moon named after him today. So there's a crater on the moon named after a Persian Jew. Maybe one day one of us will have a crater on the moon named after us. And there's an interesting thing is that a few hundred years later, Mashallah ibn Atari's horoscopic astrology spread to Europe from Baghdad, first into Greece and then into the rest of Europe. And it became the basis for a lot of the astrology that people follow today. So I don't personally believe in astrology, but sometimes when people ask me what my sign is, or they ask me like different astrological things that are very popular today, I kind of laugh inside because I say a lot of what you're talking about was brought into public knowledge by a Persian Jew back in the 700s. So a little bit proud of that one. We're going to move on to another character from Persian Jewish history. So in the city of Esfahan, Esfahan's in central Iran. It's even to this day an important Jewish city. There are still Jews living in Esfahan. It was actually founded by Jews way, way back in the day, and soon became the capital of Persia and a very important place. So in 750 or around 750, there was a Jewish tailor living in Esfahan, and his name was Isag, which is Isaac, and he was the son of Yaqub Obadiah. And at this time, you can see there's the red area, which is the Muslim area, and there's the green area, and there's the red area, which is the Byzantines, who are Christian. And these two were always fighting each other. So under the Muslim caliphate, this is the Umayyad Caliphate, it's an early empire of the Muslims, the Jews were always made fun of for having an oral law. The Jews had written the Talmud not that long before, a couple hundred years before. And the Talmud was a book of the traditions and oral laws surrounding the Torah. So there's a written law, which is the Torah, and there's the oral law, which is kind of how the things in the Torah are applicable for modern day Jews. Even in the 700s, they were already changing the laws a little bit from the Torah, and so that they would fit into an oral law. They would explain how to like live your life as a modern Jew. And so the Muslims who followed a written law only, the Quran, they did not follow an oral law. They were always lambasting the Jews for their adherence to the Talmud. So that's one thing that kind of sets the scene here. And the other thing is that there were always these wars between the Muslim Umayyads and the Byzantines to the west. And this drew comparisons to a part of the Tanakh that talks about the story. It's a prophecy of Gog and Magog, who are going to be two great nations, great non-Jewish nations in the future, fighting each other. And that's going to usher in the end of times. Like the Messiah will arise out of the war between Gog and Magog. And so since there were all these wars between these two large non-Jewish nations, people started to draw comparisons between these two nations and Gog and Magog, saying maybe the Messiah is going to come soon. So Isaac, the tailor, our friend from 750, soon he changed his name to Abu Isa, and he started being known as Abu Isa, and he started making his own alterations to the rabbinic laws of the Talmud. So he started making his own interpretations of the Torah, saying that there are more changes that are happening, and he started gathering followers. Some of his alterations included a ban on wine and meat in exile, which these Jews were living in exile, a ban on divorce, He added up to 10 prayers a day instead of the usual 3. And he affirmed some of Shammai's stances over Hillel's. In the Mishnah, Hillel and Shammai always disagree, and Hillel usually wins. Abu Isa started to accept some of Shammai's stances, which are usually stricter. At least one of those stances around Hanukkah candles survived for the next 1,000 years and is even seen in Persian manuscripts. So Abu Isa started kind of his own sect, his own heterodox sect of Judaism. He started to gather followers in Esfahan around Persia. His following had an ascetic note to it, which is, spiritual things are more important than material things. So giving up, the wine and the meat and things like that. And he also had a militant streak. So he believed in fighting for the rights that the Jews wanted. So remember, this is kind of post-Muslim invasion. So the Zoroastrians are trying to get power back from the Muslims, and the Jews joined in the Zoroastrians in the fight. So Abu Isa started to be considered as a messianic figure by the Jews, by a lot of the Jews, not all of them. And he accepted Jesus and Muhammad as prophets to their own people without ever considering himself Christian or Muslim. So he said that Jesus was a prophet for the Christians, and Muhammad was a prophet for the Muslims, and Abu Isa is a prophet for the Jews. So in 755, a Zoroastrian nobleman named Abu Sinbad started to fight against the Muslims. He started a major revolt against the Muslims. And Abu Isa and his Jews joined that revolt. So it was a Muslim and Jewish and Zoroastrian revolt against these new Muslim rulers of the region. They actually had some success. They captured Rey, Khumis, and Nishapur, which are in the north of Iran. You can see on the map. This is a pretty large and important area. They captured this area, seized the Muslim generals' treasuries, which is a big deal. And some people claimed their next goal was to go all the way to Mecca and basically destroy Islam. Unclear if that's actually true or not, but this was a major revolt. And the Muslims sent an army of 10,000 to stop these Jews and Zoroastrians in a battle near Rey, which is right where Tehran is today. Initially, they fought back. According to the legend, Abu Isa drew a line in the ground with a myrtle branch, which has a lot of significance in Judaism. And the Muslim forces could not cross that myrtle branch. They physically could not cross that line. And Abu Isa then rode out and single-handedly defeated the first assault by the Muslims. Soon he was captured and killed, and Abu Sinbad met the same fate. So we would know more about this revolt if it had succeeded. It didn't. The Jews and Zoroastrians were defeated, and the region remained Muslim. However, the movement didn't die. A lot of the followers moved to Damascus and continued to believe in his movement for 300 years. And he also had a lot of influence on Anan ben David and the early Karaite movement, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, which is very, very important to what we consider as Judaism today. So Abu Isa actually has a lot of influence in what we're talking about, in what we follow today. Now, one of his followers, Yudgan, was originally a Jew from Hamadan, which is known for Esther and Mordechai's tombs. It's also a very important Jewish city. And this guy's name was originally Yehuda, the Jewish name Yehuda. He lived in Hamadan, and he was a Jewish follower of Abu Isa. Now, he regathered Abu Isa's followers around the year 800, so maybe 45 to 50 years after that revolt. And like many of the Persian Jews of the time, Yudgan was part of the Sufi mystical movement. So Yudgan was a little different than Abu Isa. Instead of being a militant, instead of trying to use force, he was more of a hippie, more of a mystic. He added all these more bands to the religion and more ideas to the religion. So he added nonviolence as part of it. He added a non-anthropomorphic theology. So the idea that God is not human-like, God is an abstraction. He added a doctrine of free will. So you start to see new philosophical ideas coming into the movement. He abolished Shabbat and holiday observance, except as a memorial. So in some ways, not that different from a lot of modern Jews. Like the things that he's saying are not that crazy. to us today, but at the time they were quite radical. And he also accepted an explicit and esoteric meaning of the Torah. So the idea that there is a plain meaning of the Torah, there's what you read, and then there's also a deeper, hidden, mystical meaning to everything in the Torah. So for example, he talked about an allegorical nature of heaven and hell. Instead of them being literal places, they're ideas, they're allegories. What happened to this movement? Unlike Abu Isa, Yukan did not attempt to establish independence for the Persian Jews. He was still considered as a messiah by his followers, but he didn't die in battle. We don't actually know what happened to him. But we do know that about 100 years later, the movement was taken over by yet another leader, Mushka, who was even more militant and radical than Abu Isa. And Mushka tried to impose the Yudganite doctrine on all Jews. And we know what happened to Mushka. Mushka, around 900, marched out of Hamadan with a bunch of followers, and he was immediately defeated in a battle right outside of Qom, and which you can see on the map. And him and 19 remaining soldiers were the last of the sect, and they all died in a battle. So that's kind of the end of that sect in the year 900. But it's not like its ideas completely died out, because a lot of them went into the Karaite Jews, which is a movement that also started in Persia. It's a movement that rejected the Talmud, still exists today. There are still populations in Israel, in Crimea, I believe, and in Lithuania. They have a synagogue in San Francisco today, so they still exist. And this movement rejected the Talmud. It said that the Tanakh is what's important, and the Talmud is, the oral laws are not important. But a lot of their early scholars were Persian Jews like Benjamin Nahavandi and Daniel al-Qumisi. So Benjamin Nahavandi, he was from the city of Nahavan, which is in Western Iran today. And he's very important because he actually was the first Karaite who decided that the Rabbinites, the rabbinical Jews, were not that bad. And he had the idea that instead of completely rejecting the Talmud could be used as a secondary source. And so this actually brought the Karaites and Rabbinites closer. If not for him, the Karaites might have died out like Abu Isa and all his sects. But because of him, they kind of were able to survive. So this is his quote. He says, "As for other rules which are observed and recorded by the Rabbinites, and for which I could find no pertinent biblical verse, I have written them down also so that you might observe them likewise, if you so desire." They made the Talmud a secondary source. Now you can see on the map Sura. Sura is in modern-day Iraq, and Sura is where the center of the Rabbinite Jews was at the time. And their leader was Saadia Gaon. Saadia Gaon was a major rabbi, maybe the top 10 rabbis of Jewish history, very important guy. And he was always kind of fighting against these other sects. He was saying that rabbinical Judaism has to remain what it is, and these other sects have to be, stopped. And so he's really kind of the reason that rabbinical Judaism was solidified as what it is about 1,000 years ago. So Nahavandi's Karaism was influential, largely because it defined what Karaite Judaism was going to be for the rest of history and what Rabbinite Judaism was going to be for the rest of history. In Persia, those two communities eventually just mixed together and became one. In other places, they remained separate. And Saadia Gaon ended up becoming extremely influential on Judaism. He wrote one of the first Sidurim known to man, which formed the basis of the Persian liturgy and a few other liturgies, and was still in use for the next 1,000 years. Now, at the same time, in Balkh is in modern-day Afghanistan, far in the east, but at the time that was part of Persia. Hiwi al-Balkhi was a heretic Jew, like Spinoza. Everyone knows about Spinoza, but this guy's same thing, but 750 years earlier. And he started writing polemics that were making fun of the Torah. So this is not like the Karaites and those other sects. He actually is like those guys accepted the Torah and they made different changes on the Talmud. This guy actually like makes fun of the Torah, and he actually wrote a bunch of basically like challenges of the Torah, saying why he believed the Torah was ridiculous. But he was a Jewish guy. And really interestingly, he actually wrote in Hebrew. He's one of the first people to write in Hebrew outside of synagogue liturgy. in fact, the earliest known writer to compose Hebrew verse outside of the synagogue liturgy. And he would use Hebrew for his writing instead of Arabic, which was quite radical at the time. Here's a quote about him. So it says, Huey may be compared to those people from the Enlightenment ideologies in the 18th and 19th century Europe, who, in spite of their declared discomfort with traditional Jewish values, became so enamored of their ancestral language that they ended up laying the foundations for a renaissance of Hebrew letters that would one day play a pivotal part in the Jewish national revival. So too with Huey of Balkh. Even when he was attempting to disparage or ridicule the sacred scriptures, he did so as a Jew and in the language of his people. So what's in his books and his writings? He has over 200 objections to the divine origin of the Bible. He wonders why God would live among the unclean humans instead of the clean angels. He wonders why God needs sacrifices if he doesn't eat. He points out discrepancies in the scriptures, makes an argument for non-divine authorship, so that the Torah was written by humans, not by God. Today, this is not that radical. A lot of people say this, but at the time, this is like pretty radical. He had the stance that, unlike what the rabbinical Jews were saying that the human-like qualities in the Torah of God are allegorical. Huey was saying, like, no, they're very clearly, the people who wrote the Torah thought that God was like a man. And he also comes up with rationalistic explanations of the miracles. Saadia Gaon, of course, living over in Sura, did not like this, and he fought against Huey's writings virulently. Unfortunately, neither of their books are do we have anymore. They're both lost. Huey's books we actually only know about because of their quotations in other scriptures or in other things, and mostly from other people writing about how wrong he is. It's not like the Karaites liked him. They also disliked him, and he was so popular at the time that the Karaites and the Rabbinites, again, got a little closer than they were before. And people hated Huey so much that there's only one instance of his real name preserved. Otherwise, they actually spell his name with an anagram, Huey al-Kalbi, which means Huey of the dogs or Huey the dog. So he's very much hated by the Jews of the time, except for the Jews who agreed with what he was saying, which he had a following. So there's Huey, another interesting character from Persian Jewish history. Now, it's not like everyone from Persian Jewish history was a militant warrior or a heretic. We have people who fit within rabbinical Judaism as well. So there's the character of Sarah bat Asher, and she was somewhat more of a legendary character. There's really like, who knows if she existed, but she is actually mentioned in the Torah. She's the only granddaughter of Jacob mentioned in the Torah. She's the daughter of his son, Asher. And according to the stories, she is the one who informed Jacob that his son, Joseph, was still alive in Egypt. She was afraid that telling this old man this news would kill him. It would like give him a shock, give him a heart attack. And so she informed him while he was praying. She sat next to him with a harp and she sang a song saying that Joseph is alive and living in Egypt and has two sons, Menashe and Ephraim. Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim, which rhymes with Ephraim. Jacob was so happy about hearing this news that he blessed Sarah bat Asher to live forever. And according to this midrash, she was eventually permitted to enter heaven alive, which is achieved only really by her and by Eliyahu Hanavi. So very, very special person in Jewish midrash, and especially among the Iranian Jews. There's stories of Sarah bat Asher throughout the next 1,500 years of Jewish history. She shows up at the time of slavery, at the time of Moshe. She appears at the time of King David. One of the stories that I love the most is that during the discussions of the Talmud, the rabbis were sitting around and they were discussing what the water looked like when the Red Sea was split. And they're arguing. One rabbi, this is in the Talmud, one rabbi says it looked like this, and another rabbi says, no, it looked like that. And then this old lady sticks her head into the window and she says, actually, you're wrong. It looked like this. And they say, how do you know? And she says, well, because I was there, of course. And that was Sarah bat Asher, who was there at the splitting of Red Sea and still there during the writing of the Talmud, which would be 1,500 years later. In Iranian Jewish tradition, she went into exile with her tribe, which would make sense why she was there during the Talmud discussions. And she ended up living in a small town near Esfahan called Pir Bakran. And there's still a 2,000-year-old cemetery there of the Persian Jews. In the year 1133, a fire burned down the synagogue of that town. And the story is that she was still living there at this time. And she only disappeared in 1133 during this fire, presumably by ascending alive to heaven. There's still a stone there that commemorates her, and it's considered like as her grave, quote unquote, not actually her grave because she didn't die. But it's like her pilgrimage spot. And a lot of people go there on pilgrimage. It's still, even to this day, an important pilgrimage site for the Persian Jews. There are stories like Shah Abbas in the 1600s who went there. He ended up there because he was chasing a deer he was hunting, and he went into the chamber and he had these powerful visions, and he actually reversed like an anti-Jewish edict in the country because of these visions he had. And there are stories from him all the way to people who are still alive today, like people I've spoken to from the community who say that like when they were kids, they went there on pilgrimage and then like fell into a well and were suddenly saved by this old man who then disappeared. And that old man was Eliyahu Hanavi. Like people still alive today have had visions there. So whatever you believe about the story or about the power of that place, that clearly has huge significance for the population of Persian Jews, and it's a very cool story. Now, in the 1100s, right around the same time as that fire that destroyed Pir Bakran's synagogue, there are a lot of different rabbis and warrior Jews that we hear about in this region. So there are Jews who are members of the assassins of the Caspian region, that's in the north of Persia. The assassins were a group of mostly Muslims who would they were like hired killers of different crusader leaders and caliphate leaders. They were basically just this tribe that lived in the north and kind of did their own thing. And there were Jews who were among them. In the 1150s, we see a lot of battles between the Neyshapur Turks, that's the group on the right in the green, and the Persians living around Rey, which is the purple area. The autonomous Jews of Rey fought on both sides of these battles at different times. And my favorite character from that is Rabbi Moshe. He was a rabbi, but he was also a master archer, which I think is just a cool combination. I don't know any rabbis today who are also master archers. And Rabbi Moshe became the Persian war hero of a battle against the Turks. And he was such a hero in this battle that he was then released from his service, and his prestige allowed him to marry the daughter of the rabbi of Esfahan, Sar Shalom. And Sar Shalom is a rabbi who's mentioned in a few different places. He's a very important rabbi of the time. And the only rabbi that was more important than him was kind of his master, who was Samuel ben Ali. Samuel ben Ali lived in Baghdad and Mosul. He was the head of the Jewish Academy there. His father, Ali, was also a famous rabbi. But Samuel ben Ali was a contemporary of Maimonides. So I have Cairo over here on the left, and right here, Cairo. Cairo is where Maimonides lived, the Rambam. He is considered maybe in the top 5 greatest rabbis of all time, if not like top 1. He is right there. He's, known as being one of the greatest rabbis ever, even today. And at the time, Samuel ben Ali was seen as a contemporary and an equal of Maimonides. So very, very important guy. They used to write commentaries on each other's works. They even clashed over their differing philosophies. They disagreed about resurrection. They disagreed about the world to come, and they disagreed about some of the Persian characters that we're going to see coming up in a couple slides. The story I love is that Rabbi Samuel's daughter was also herself a Talmudic expert, and she's perhaps the first female rabbi in Jewish history. So some people today know about Asnat Barazani, who was a Kurdish female rabbi in the 1600s. People are starting to call her the first female rabbi. It turns out that even 500 years before that, there's another character who may be somewhat of a female rabbi. There were rules that men and women couldn't be in the same room alone. And so the daughter of Samuel ben Ali, whose name we don't know, she would sit in her room and she would give lectures from her window from behind a curtain so that men couldn't see her. But men would crowd around her window from outside and listen to her lectures. Love that image. Such a cool image. Just this woman sitting inside because of the rules of the time, but she is the one who's teaching the men who are crowding outside her window trying to get her knowledge. Love that. Samuel ben Ali, so his father Ali was also a great rabbi. And one of Ali's students was a guy named Menachem. He was from the mountain town of Amedi, which is a little bit northeast of Mosul, where you see Mosul on that map, a little bit northeast of there. And in the town of Amedi, this guy Menachem, his father was a failed Messiah himself. But Menachem was a knowledgeable Jew. He was learning from Rabbi Ali, and he was well-versed also in Muslim literature and also in magic of the time. Very well-rounded. So you'll see on the map on the left, you see the nations of Antioch, Tripoli, Damascus. These are all crusader states. So this is when the Christians from Europe had decided that they deserved to own the Holy Land. They wanted to take over the Holy Land. And so they came from Europe and set up all these crusader states, and they were fighting the Muslims. And the Muslims were fighting the Christians. These are the Crusades, very important part of history, very bad part of history for the Jews. But the Jews living in Persia started to actually gain some power because the Muslims were busy fighting the Christians, so they were losing some of their power in the central government. So Menachem, this Jew from Amedi, he changed his name to David al-Roy. See a lot of this when people become messianic characters, they change their name. And he came up with a doctrine of a Jewish return to autonomy in the Holy Land, free from the Muslims and free from the Christians. So this guy came up with an idea that the Jews should have their own independence, but not in Persia. They should have their independence in the Holy Land. So this is a concept that could be equated with Zionism. Usually you hear that Zionism was invented by Theodor Herzl in Hungary in the 1800s. There are plenty of precedents to that of Jews from all over the world making this decision that why should the Muslims own that land? Why should the Christians own that land? That's ours. We should own that. So David al-Roy started gathering followers in Persia, Mosul, Baghdad, this whole region. And he had a lot of military power. He's very, very popular at the time. And he himself started to claim to be the Messiah. And with this large following, he decided to attack the citadel of his native town of Amedi. And he and his followers showed up there with weapons hidden under their robes, pretending to be there to study the Talmud. So here's a picture. That's Amedi today. I took that picture. I've actually been there. And it's a very beautiful little town on top of this mesa. And so you can imagine the Jews showing up at this town with weapons under their robes, ready to take over this town. Immediately, a war breaks out between David al-Roy and the Seljuk Sultan, that's the Persians and Turks of the time who controlled the region, the Muslims. And this war surely would have continued against the Crusaders, but David al-Roy was captured and imprisoned in Tabaristan, which is in the northeast of Iran. He soon escaped from prison, returned to this town, ready to start a new war, and then he was quickly assassinated. But his popularity remained. He was continued to be regarded as the Messiah for quite a while. There were more messianic movements that came from that, but he's kind of one of the important ones. Now we're going to move on. After the Crusades, the next major thing that happened was that the Mongols took over the world. The Mongols came from far in the east, from Mongolia, and they took over everything. They utterly ravaged Persia. They killed about 90% of the Persian population. However, soon after taking over, they just kind of ended up staying and deciding to live here now. And in 1284, a Jew from Abhar, whose name is Sad al-Dawleh, that's probably a title, I don't know what his actual name was, maybe that's his actual name, but he became part of the bureaucratic system of the Persian Mongol Empire in the city of Mosul. And he then went to Baghdad. He became more and more important. He became friends with the Mongol prince. His daughter married the prefect of Baghdad, so he's kind of rising in the ranks. And very soon he was appointed the Grand Vizier under the Buddhist Mongol leader of the Mongol Empire, Arghun Khan. This is a big deal. The Grand Vizier, that's like the second in command. This is like, so in the Mongol Empire, the second in command was a Persian Jew. This is a very weird thing that this would happen, very unlikely. And under him, the Jews had this period of prosperity and started to flock to Baghdad from all over the world. And that's when Baghdad became such an important Jewish city as it remained for the next 700 years until recently. Now, Sa'd al-Dawla, he was very important. He helped establish diplomatic relations with Europe. So he brought a legitimacy to the Mongol Empire. He stripped the Mongol princes of their unfairly acquired wealth, then of course gave that wealth to his own friends and family, friends and family. The Mongols and Persians didn't like that. They didn't like that the Jews were getting powerful, and so they started to attempt to assassinate members of his family. And then in March 1291, when Arghun Khan, the leader, was ill, Sa'd al-Dawla is invited to the Feast of Tugachar, probably in Baghdad. And this is kind of like when the Game of Thrones episode happens. He was lured there with a bunch of his family, and they were all assassinated during this big feast. And all their possessions were confiscated. His family members went on to be murdered in very brutal ways that are described and known. And after this, there's a big period of persecution of the Persian Jews. So you see a lot of good things happen for the Jews, and then bad things, and then good things, and then bad things. Tabriz and Baghdad were ransacked. Their Jewish neighborhoods were ransacked. I have Tabriz on this map here. Tabriz was, at the time, the biggest city in the world by population, very important place, and remained a very important city until the 1800s when the Jewish community was wiped out by a pogrom. Anyway, Arghun Khan soon died just a week later. He was poisoned by his own shaman. And in 1295, so just 4 years later, the Mongols converted to Islam, which ushered in a time of persecution for the Jews, Christians, and Buddhists of Persia. Sorry. So that's the story of Sa'd al-Dawla. A painful end to a very prosperous time for the Jews. And after this, you don't see a lot of Jewish power anymore. That's kind of the last instance of that. There was another Jewish vizier about 100 years later named Rashid al-Din Hamadani, who actually had to convert to Islam in order to become the vizier. But then he was also murdered for being a Jew later. So did he really convert? Who knows? So this is kind of the end of Jewish power. The Mongols, I mentioned they killed 90% of Persia. The city of Shiraz, which you see in the south, the city of Shiraz was mostly left alone. And so that city started to flourish now in the 12 and 1300s. And that's where we get our next and final character for today's topic. And that's Maulana Shaheen Shirazi. Maulana means our master or our teacher. And Shaheen is a pen name. Shaheen, this is a poet from Shiraz, probably from Shiraz. And he took the title of Shaheen, which means falcon. We don't know his real name. And in the 1200s, late 1200s and early 1300s, Shaheen started writing Persian epic poems in the style of Ferdowsi, the great poetic master of Persian poetry. Ferdowsi would write Persian poetry based on Persian mythology, like these long epic poems. They're very famous, still read today. And Shaheen, just a couple hundred years after Ferdowsi, started doing the same thing, but instead of using Persian mythology as a source, he was using the Torah. He was using Persian biblical stories. And he'd also use qasas, which is the Muslim versions of those stories, which are slightly different. And he used a lot of midrashim in his poetry as well. In 1327, he completed Musanameh, which is a huge retelling of all the narrative parts of Moshe's life. So that's the book of Exodus through Deuteronomy, Shemot through Devarim. But he wrote them in Persian epic poetic verse. So these are epic poems written in rhythm and rhyme, but it's all Jewish stories. And this became the most influential inspiration for all of the following Persian Jewish poets, many of whom we're going to talk about in next week's class. So here's an example of the stuff that he wrote. This is a part of Musanameh on the left, and it says, انداختن مادر موسی علیه السلام در آتش سوزان از ترس فرعون. So if you read Hebrew and you read that, that won't make any sense to you because it's in Persian, but written in Hebrew letters. And what that means is the throwing, so Moses' mother throws Moses, peace be upon him, into the fire, into the burning fire, out of fear of Pharaoh. So that is a story from the Qasas, from the Muslim versions. In the Jewish version, Moses is put in the river in a wicker basket. In this version, he's thrown in the fire. Of course, he survives the fire. But I just wanted to show you what a typical illuminated manuscript of Judeo-Persian from Shaheen looks like. Now, his poems have a lot of Sufi elements in them because Sufism was very much a Jewish thing at the time. And this is kind of pre-Kabbalah becoming widespread. So at the time, the Persian Jews were very much into Sufism, and many of the Sufis were of Jewish background, and they're very tied to each other. Today, Sufism is really only associated with Islam, but at the time, it was very much also a Jewish thing. And we see a lot of those elements in the poems. So this is a part from Musa Name where Moshe goes and sees the burning bush for the first time. And we'll start in the middle. So it says, know that the flames you saw from far away are nothing but pure light. As God's voice was absorbed by his soul's ears, Moses replied, here I am, Hineni, then lost all consciousness of self. Then when by the command of time's creator, Emron's son, meaning Moses, removed his sandals, he was addressed again. So that section, lost all consciousness of self. When I read that, I was kind of blown away because it's talking about ego loss. It's talking about this, there's the feeling that this is a very Sufi idea, that there's the idea that there is the self, like there's me, and then there's all this stuff that's not me. And that leads to selfishness and arrogance. And the idea is that one needs to forget the me and become one with the universe and become one with God. And only through becoming one with God can we reach enlightenment and stop being these selfish kind of animal creatures that we are. And so this is something that happens, right? Moshe sees the burning bush and suddenly loses all knowledge of his self as opposed to the world, and he becomes one with God in that moment. Really cool thing to read in a Jewish poem, and really cool thing to read in a Persian Jewish poem from 700 years ago. So here's another section that has the Sufi element in it. It says, a portion of the night until the smile of dawn, the prophet, meaning Moses, spent communing with the Lord. That night he spoke with him tumultuously, one-to-one, till dawn. Intoxicated by the night he had spent, the prophet headed toward the sage Yitro. So the term intoxicated meaning drunk, is also a Sufi term used to describe spiritual intoxication, right? Alcohol is not allowed in Islam, but it's a spiritual intoxication. It's saying that he spoke with God until he became drunk with godness, which is, you read in all of the Sufi poems. If you read Rumi, it talks all about intoxication. If you read Omar Khayyam, it talks all about drinking wine and getting intoxicated, but it's seen as a metaphor. So Shaheen is very much in the same vein as all the great Persian poets who are mostly Sufis. He himself was kind of the same thing. In the next quote, I love this one. So this is also just very, very Sufi and a little bit Kabbalistic too. So it says, upon the way, intense desire for union with the friend burned within him. The friend or the companion is yar in Farsi, and it's another term for God. But it's like relating God to being a personal companion. Then of a sudden, he saw the world flooded in light. Fire fell upon mountain and stone. Heavy mountains were toppled. It gets kind of trippy. Heaven and earth, mountain and desert, all trembled by the judge's command. The entire world was filled with endless light, which every moment increased. Then suddenly, Kalim is also another name for Moshe, Kalim Allah, meaning the word of God. Kalim glanced up from the path, beheld the majesty, and took leave of his senses. Again, we get this loss of consciousness. That pure man turned entirely into spirit. Being beside himself, he rent the garment of his soul. A cry arose from the lover, now that he suddenly beheld his beloved enter. So this is the personal companionship metaphor that we see in Kabbalah. We see it in Sufism. God as the lover of the mystic who is relating to God in this way of lovers and friends and tearing the garment of your soul and all of that. So very, very cool stuff. Very mystical. In 1333, Shahin completed Ardashir Nameh and Ezra Nameh, which were based on other sections of the Tanakh outside of the Torah. Ardashir Nameh is mainly a telling of the Purim story, but includes a Jewish origin for King Cyrus. So we see how the Persian stories are bleeding into the Jewish stories, and how at the time for Shahin, they really were one thing. Jewish and Persian were one unifying thing. There weren't separate things like we perceive them today. Ezra Nameh is based on the book of Ezra, also included a love story between Shiruya, the son of Vashti, and a Chinese princess named Mahazad. Just gives you more of the context of where Shahin was living. At the time, Judaism was very much an Asian religion, and Middle Eastern and Asian religion. It was next to China. It was on the Silk Road near China. There are stories of Vashti, who was a Persian character from the story of Purim. But all of this was in the story of Ezra, which takes place in Israel. And so really a syncretic idea of the context of Shahin. In 1358, Shahin completed another magnum opus called Bereshit Nameh, which is a Persian epic poem retelling of all of the narrative parts of the book of Genesis. It includes the book of Job and has some other stories in it too. Bereshit Nameh is beautiful. I read the whole thing last year. I'm going to start reading Musa Nameh this year. And Bereshit Nameh has a section in it that I want to read today, and that'll kind of be the end of this. But the section is from a prayer that he actually puts as an introduction to the narrative. So we saw some narrative stuff from Musa Nameh. Now I'm going to show you a kind of a prayer written by Shahin in Judeo-Persian. So first, this is what it looks like. I'll read a little bit of it for you, and just so you can get a sense of what it sounds like, because you have to see, because we'll read the English, but you have to see that the English doesn't quite do it justice, because you have to hear the rhymes and the rhythm and see how it's like, this wasn't something that was necessarily even read. This was something that was performed around the campfire, around, this is something that people told. So it goes like this. Khodavanda mera tawfiq dadi. ز رحمت بر رخم درها گشادی فکندی ذوق شوق در دماغم فروزان شد از آن روشن چراغم ز صحرای عدم آوردیم شاد میان آب و خاک و آتش و باد. You see it has that rhythm and it has that rhyme. Here it is in English transliteration. And we'll go about halfway down. You see the word toi repeating. So to means you, and it's the familiar word for you. It's like thou. It's similar with Spanish too. And this is the part where Shahin is telling God all the things that God is. He's saying, so he says, toi khaliq makhluqat afaq, toi darande ayvan و nataq. توی روزی رسان پشه و مور توی آمرزگار مرده در گور. Keep saying all these other things that God is. And this is what it is in English. So I think we'll read the whole thing in English together. So it says, God, you have given me success. In your mercy, you opened doors before me. You threw joy and delight into my consciousness, my light illuminated from your brightness. You delivered me satisfied from deserts of destruction, from between water, earth, fire, and wind. I was an embryo without legs or head, without ears, eyes, chest, or form. From your own mercy, you looked in my direction. The waters of mercy flowed into my gutter. Of your existence, I am undeserving. You give my daily portion, my omnipotent one. How can I thank you? My words fail me. The wisest of minds would remain bewildered. As for my confessions to the one with his hand in all, I need not confess them, for you know all secrets. You are the creator of conscious creatures. You are an open balcony, not a closed ceiling. You are the provider for mosquitoes and for ants. You are the forgiver of the dead in their graves. You are the Sultan, the ultimate judge, the merciful one, the great creator, that King of kings unique. To you, the sultans are like servants. You are that visible, merciful, compassionate one, God of the morning, evening, night, and day. You are the powerful one, the principal, the king, the light of Venus, the sun, and the moon. You are the treasure of mercy, the sea of gifts, the medicine for the pain of the pain, the forgiver, the veiler, the divine. You are the almighty, the intention. You are existence itself. You are the seer, the knower, the clairvoyant. You are the king, the sovereign, the inimitable one. Now he's talking to himself. Shahin, how long will you pontificate? How much can you elaborate with words? go sit in a corner and be silent, breathe deeply, leave behind this abundance of scribbles. I'm just going to let that speak for itself. I think it's a really beautiful poem, and the hundreds and hundreds of pages of Bereshit Nameh are full of beautiful nuggets that I think really bring a vivid nature to the Jews of Persia, and we really see like how the people were thinking and how they related to their religion. So Shaheen died soon after finishing Bereshit Nameh, and he was buried in Shiraz near the other great Persian poets like Sa'di and Hafez. It's a deeply mystical body of work that he has, poetry that's knowledgeable of Judaism and Islam, very popular throughout Persia, many, many manuscripts that we still have today, other ones that keep showing up in people's attics that people say, oh, this is something my grandfather had, and you look at it and it's Shaheen. Today, his poems have been reprinted and even transcribed in Persian scripts, but otherwise, translations are very hard to come by. There's no way that you can just go and find an English translation of Shaheen. There are some that, like, some scholars have done sections of it, but they're not widely available. And so this is a hope that I have, is that these poems will be widely translated into English for English speakers to be able to read and access, even though they won't get the rhythm and the rhyme, and they won't get the full effect, but still better than nothing. He was the basis of most of Persian Jewish literary output, which I mentioned, and we're going to explore that a lot deeper next week with some more poets and some of their writings. And so that's it for today. Next week, we're going to have more poets, rabbis, mystics, and musicians from the Safavid era, which is the 1500s, through the modern day. Not so many warriors anymore in the modern era, but here are some pictures on the left of some of the people we're going to talk about, just to whet your appetite, so that hopefully you all come next week too. So there we go.
Thank you so much. I have to say the one on the left definitely looked like some kind of a warrior or some kind of at least war or something.
We'll see next week.
I'm excited to see next week. So I don't see any questions yet in the chat. I do invite you to put in your questions or comments. And I'm inviting you to open your cameras and microphones, or sorry, open your cameras, please don't open your microphones. And if you, just because you're invited to be a panelist, that doesn't mean you're supposed to be presenting. That just means that's my way for inviting you to open your camera. So Shaheen is very well known. And so thank you very much for sharing that, because that was an important part to this. And I also have to say that I love that you added in the women. And actually the daughter of Samuel ben Ali, where did you find information about her? I
don't remember. I'll have to look at the sources.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to get you off guard. It was just because, you know, I try to find as many women as possible. And so it's very interesting to
it's sad we don't have her name anymore.
Right.
As far as I know, but yeah.
It's pretty typical though, I think. Yeah. So if there's one thing that surprised you in doing this research, can you tell us what it was? Yeah, I think a big one is that, I mean, I've done this in other talks where, like, there's a certain mythology around Persian Jews that I hear that's like, they never really amounted to anything. They, you know, the Persian Jews were either like always just oppressed and they were, you know, nobodies throughout all of history. And then you start looking at the history and it's like, no, we had like pretty big revolutions and people who fought and rabbis who were master archers and, you know, like really interesting things like that, that I think the whole Jewish world should know about. So that's definitely one of the interesting one, like surprising ones. And another one is just that, like, there were rabbis and there were, you know, people who had influence on general Judaism in the world and on, I mean, history in the world in general, and we just don't really know about them. Right, and we don't, and I think people aren't aware of this connection between, like you said, Surah and the hotbed of Jewish learning and Talmudic learning. And I think people are camera shy today, so I'm not going to push it more than that, and that's okay because I have my questions and I want to make sure that we end on time. but I really appreciate it. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed one. I never read any of these people except a little bit about Shaheen. How long did it take you to compile this research, and what kind of sources did you use?
Yeah, so I've been compiling this research for years now. Just kind of, it's not my full-time anything, but it's just an interest I have. So I've been reading about this stuff since probably 2015, 2016, and just gathering all this stuff I can find. And I started looking at primary sources. So I got interested in, like, well, I read about this on Wikipedia, like, let me see what that links to, and then let me go to that. And then suddenly I'm, on the website of a bookstore, of a specialty bookstore that has one copy of a book that I want, and, or I'm in some other country tracking something down because there are nothing in print here anyway. So there are sources out there. A lot of them are the primary sources. So some of it is going to libraries and finding, like, scans of manuscripts, like handwritten Judeo-Persian manuscripts from 500 years ago that you look at, and suddenly it tells you all this information that you never knew about, that you can't just find by Googling. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. Well, and then I'm going to say thank you, because I want to make sure we leave some stuff for next week. And I'm very excited, like I said, about next week. Thank you so much for this. Again, thank you all for joining, even though you're camera shy, but we accept that as well. Hopefully next week you'll come ready to share on camera so we can see who we're talking to. But again, thank you all for joining, and thank you, Alan, so much for really quite interesting talk.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Yes, you do need to re-register for next week. If there are any issues, please do reach out. I am sending my email in the follow-up email. So, and also if you have any questions or comments that you thought of after we sign off right now, send it to me as well. And we'll continue the conversation.
Definitely.
Have a great rest of your day.